Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus. In the Ohio Senate, that's the Majority Caucus. Great to have back on the program a former Ohio Senate President, current State Auditor in the great state of Ohio, Keith Faber. Great to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me back.
You know, when we think about the State Auditor's Office, we think about numbers, we think about accounting, we think about audits. We don't often think about cybercrime, though. And cybercrime is a huge issue for all sizes of governments around the state of Ohio. And I just want to read a couple excerpts to get us started about the cybercrime attack, the ransomware attack that happened on the city of Columbus that wound up having to pay out a $4 million ransom. This is from some recent news coverage. Following a string of cyber attacks on local governments across Ohio, the state is now requiring all local governments to have cybersecurity policies and to approve ransom payments to hackers in full view of the public. That was also part of the operating budget and a bill that you had been supporting.
Yeah, we had worked on this issue for quite a while. Yes, the state auditor's office, most people think we're just a sleepy backwater state agency. I always tell people we don't audit individuals, we don't audit companies, and we have nothing to do with taxes. If your property taxes are too high, it's not the state auditor's office. What do? We essentially audit government. We are the watchdog over taxpayer money. And today, while we've convicted more than 140 individuals for lying, stealing, and cheating with government money, the biggest threat to your tax dollars, in our opinion, is cyber fraud. And so we have a very aggressive education program to try and educate local governments and state agencies and other folks in government how to avoid being a victim. A week doesn't go by in state government that we don't find out about another municipality, another village, another township, another local government entity that's been hit with a cyber fraud. And it can range from tens of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars of loss. And so it's a big deal. We worked with legislation with a couple of your senators and a couple state representatives that was on its way to passing, that the Senate actually thought it was a good idea to include in the budget. Thank you for that to your your senators. And ultimately, the bill does a number of things. First, the bill requires what you just mentioned. If you're going to pay a ransom, look, I think Ohio should be a no ransom state. That was our initial provision in the bill, and local governments went apoplectic about it. And so we compromised and said, okay, if you're going to pay a ransom, I think the public policy in Ohio is we don't pay a ransom. If you're going to attack an Ohio governmental entity, you're not going to get paid. But the decision was made to allow the local government's elective bodies, the elected officials, to vote and approve paying a ransom in full disclosure in the full public view. In addition, it requires them to actually have a cyber fraud avoidance plan. I mean, what a novel concept.
Absolutely. And so it does provide local control. So if a small government or a medium-sized, or even like the city of Columbus, city council had to approve it on a vote in full view of the public.
That's right. So the public has transparency. And candidly, there may be a circumstance when like when I first became auditor, we had a very small county auditor's office that get hit, and the ransom request was $800. They couldn't replace their hard drives for $800. And so, I told her sometimes people pay these, and like Columbus, the data still gets released. And so paying a ransom isn't an assurance that you're going to get your data back or that it's going to be secure. But for $800, maybe there's a business case to be made for that. I'm not sure $4 million is, but that's a question for Columbus to make.
Back to that story. This is from NBC4's reporting, NBC station in Columbus. It said among the details laid bare were names from domestic violence cases, social security numbers for police officers, and crime victims alike. The dump not only impacts city employees, but also revealed personal information for residents and visitors going back years. Anyone who entered Columbus City Hall within the past 20 years might be affected. Is there some personal liability here? I mean, if you're running a security network with virtually no security on a multi-billion-dollar government platform like the city of Columbus, is there some personal liability for elected officials?
Yeah, that's really not an auditor's call for that issue. But on local government losses, for losses to the taxpayer, there certainly is. If they have not taken steps For example, there's this concept, we call it a vendor redirect, where somebody calls up and pretends to be ABC Paving and say, hey, this is Ted from ABC Paving. We just paved a bunch of your streets. We changed our banking from Fifth Third to Key Bank. Here's our new bank information. Send our check here. All too often, local governments would just do it. Okay, I think that was Ted. And guess what? It wasn't Ted. And so the money ends up who knows where, but certainly lost. Well, the city still has to pay ABC Paving, who really should get paid. And essentially, they gave free money to a fraudster. And so we've sent out now 2 bulletins directing and creating policies for local governments to avoid that very scenario. And we have said to local elected officials and financial officers, if you have this circumstance hit you after we've notified you how to avoid it, and you didn't take steps to avoid it, you could be personally on the hook for that. You're now gambling with your money, not the public's money. The simple message, take the reasonable precautions to avoid that. And they're pretty simple. Same things we do in our everyday life. Actually, make sure you're talking to Ted from ABC Paving. Make sure Ted is the authorized person to give you new bank information, and have them come in person. We say never, 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 ever, never, 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 ever, never, ever take a redirect request over the phone or electronically, because you don't know who you're talking to. Even if the email says ABC Paving, it could be a scam.
Yeah, the logo can look dead on, spot on, because I've seen things come to the house before that say Spectrum Cable, and on quality type of paper, comes to an elderly person and it looks legitimate, and it's not. It's a scam.
The scammers are really good. They have the ability to do social engineering in ways that we can only imagine. We have to take reasonable precautions. Look, I say this all the time. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when most governments are going to get hit with some kind of cyber fraud. As AI comes in, it's getting better. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when most people in Ohio are going to get hit, or somebody's going to attempt to scam you. And so that's a conversation we'll have in a minute about how this impacts Bob and Betty Buckeye. But in the end, the real answer is you got to be constantly vigilant. We have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once.
On part of your notice on the payment redirect and business email compromise schemes, I thought this really rang close to home. Excuse me. Pay close attention to the name of the employee or vendor, as you said. Oftentimes, cybercriminals make subtle changes to names to make you think you're communicating with a legitimate or known person or vendor. The email or invoice was unexpected. Oh, did we miss a bill? Or this is an additional charge? Unless you are expecting an email, never click on links or open attachments without first identifying the authenticity of the message. Or, this is a good one, the email or invoice comes with a sense of urgency, including a positive reward or negative consequence for not acting quickly.
They're doing social engineering to get you to react to it. And look, it's easy. I deal in this world, and I have been, I've had people try to scam me where I've almost made circumstance. Real story. When they talk about the things you can do to avoid this, one of the things you need to do is hover over the email address when you get it. And if it comes up saying it's from Key Bank, or if it says it's coming from your cable company or your gas company, if it's from somebody on Gmail, it's a pretty good indicator it's a scam, because Columbia Gas or your American Express or your bank doesn't use a Gmail account.
They have their own domain.
And it's going to come up saying it's from, Columbia Gas on the header. But when you hover over it, the real address is going to be revealed. Real story, we had a port authority who was the victim of a redirect scheme. What happened is somebody pretended to be the port authority. They sent an invoice that was supposed to come from the port authority. They'd gone on public records and gotten a copy of the actual invoice, went to the county auditor's office. The address in port authority had an extra I. I knew that the email address was fake, and I'm looking at the email and I can't figure out what's wrong with it. Okay, your eye glosses over that kind of stuff. Your mind edits when you read all the time. And they had known that the chances of somebody seeing that were less, and they do it enough times, they only have to be right once, right? Everybody else has to be right 100%. And so what happened is the county auditor sent an $86,000 check to the wrong account, all because somebody had cloned the Port Authority's email. So they got an email asking for a redirect Again, they didn't do our two-step verification that we require, and they lost $86,000. An even bigger one. There was a community college that lost $6 million to a hacker. Now, the good news is this financial officer for the community college was very vigilant, and this is the other part I tell people all the time. If you are a victim, never ever bury your head in the sand. Act immediately when you figure out something's wrong. He went on his bank account, Star Ohio, and looked to see where the money was that he had just transferred. He was told to transfer it to a different bank account. It didn't show up the next day. So he immediately said, okay, I got to look more into this. Had he done this before, maybe he wouldn't have had the exposure, but immediately contacted us, contacted the Secret Service, contacted the Federal Reserve, and we were able to use something called the KILL program and got all $6 million back because they moved this money by ACH transactions, and that's essentially automated checks. If they move it to a number of banks with something called cyber mules, fraud, essentially financial mules. If we can catch it before they hop it out of the country, the Federal Reserve can lock it down and get the money back. In this case, we got all $6 million back. But how would you like to be the fiscal officer for the community college, having to go tell your trustees, yeah, I almost lost $6 million, but the good news is we got it all back? I still don't think that was a very good day. And that's the reason we put out these bulletins and guidance.
And there's best practices. And I know that what had been recommended through best practices is through an organization called NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and then cyberohio.gov also is a training organization that consults with local municipalities, because you would think that big governments like Cuyahoga County or Franklin County, the city of Columbus, would be tech savvy, but they're not. So you can imagine on a smaller level with smaller budgets, maybe you have one person who's trying to run the IT program.
And a lot of times, even if they're super tech savvy, and this is the reason we do cyber fraud training at the auditor's office, you only need one weakness. And in almost every case where there's a loss, the weakness is human. It can be as simple as what happened to a company in Ohio that had 20,000 employees. Somebody called one of their out-of-state salespeople saying, hey, this is the IT director, Joe Smith. They had the right name for the IT director. Their phone was cloned, so it looked like it was coming from the home office. I need remote access to your laptop because we're doing an update and we haven't been able to get yours in. And the guy, if he went on and looked, he'd see the IT director. Well, the IT director actually had left 3 months before. But this shut down a major Ohio company for weeks. Cost them tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because one of their remote employees gave remote access to their laptop and the fraudster got into the company. Now, the good news in their case is that they had multiple layers of internal security, so the stuff that was compromised wasn't the really good stuff, but it was still bad stuff. And when the FBI was negotiating, and it was FBI, they had Russian actors. And so these are government. I mean, some of these people are Russian actors. We think Putin might be paying for his Ukraine war in part with cyber fraud. But, one of the things they heard in the background was, do you think they know we didn't get anything of value when they were trying to negotiate the ransom with their company? So even sophisticated players can be victim. And so it's the reason why we and all governments should do this. I know the Senate sends out fake emails to see if you can get your employees to bite on links and things like that for phishing. That's usually how things get in. They get you to scam. I always tell people, if you've got one of these, you've got a vector to be a victim of cyber fraud. I guarantee you on your phone, there's a text asking you to pay for a toll you didn't do. And it's not the toll that they want. It's not the little bit of toll rate. They want to get into your phone and they want to get into your financial information. There's probably an email on your emails claiming to be you won the Lowe's Customer Appreciation Survey, and they're going to give you a free gas grill or give you a free Sam's membership. Let me give you a hint. There is no free gas grill and there is no Sam's membership. What they want to do is get you to click on that and give you access to your devices and your information. And the second issue is, hopefully, if you really bite, they'll get you to communicate with them and they can use social engineering to get your personal information.
They'll empty your bank, and the elderly, senior citizens, they are truly at risk for losing their life savings.
Absolutely. It is a real life. I don't know how many people saw the Beekeeper movie.
Great movie.
Jason Statham goes out and wreaks havoc on somebody who scammed the elderly lady who he was staying with. And ultimately, we need more Jason Stathams out there to make some examples of these guys. Yeah. But again, that was a movie. Real life. My brother, who is a computer expert, worked for the Defense Department, literally saved his mother-in-law from being beekeepered. And in that circumstance, what happened was her husband had died during COVID, so Kevin was helping her take care of all of her financial affairs. And what happened was he was sitting out on the pontoon boat in the middle of the lake and gets a call from his mother-in-law saying, "Hey, Kevin, where's the password for this brokerage account?" "Okay, why do you need that?" "Well, because I've got this guy who emailed me and said he can get me a lot better investment returns and I can make more money, and the little bit I'm making isn't good enough and I should be doing better." "Did you send him information?" "No, I'm getting ready to send him all the stuff." And my brother said, "Do me a favor. Go sit on the couch. Don't touch the computer. Don't enter anything. I don't want you to answer the phone. I don't want you to get up. I want you to sit on the couch. I'll be there in 45 minutes. He got there and she was literally one keystroke away from sending all of her bank information, all of her, and she's a sophisticated, she isn't an unintelligent, but she thought this person was legitimate. And the answer is, this is happening far too often. And we need an attorney general, we need prosecutors, and frankly, we need the federal government that's willing to make an example of some of these people.
One thing we do have is a special investigations unit, which is very interesting. It's almost like I want to roll the Law and Order theme. SIU, Ohio Auditor's Office. What is the SIU?
It's our criminal unit. Most people don't think of the auditor's office and think of criminal units, but we've got men and women with badges and guns. We partner them up one-on-one with forensic auditors. And then we also have special prosecutors who actually go into the courtroom and get convictions on individuals who are lying, cheating, and stealing with government money. It is a big deal. I actually tried a case about a month ago. I might be the first state auditor in history to actually convict somebody. We convicted the former director of the Allen County Regional Transit Authority of 7 felonies, including 2 of the highest dollar amounts, when she was literally taking money from the RTA and using it to influence an election. And then she also stole some money herself. And so I went in the courtroom, did a 4-day trial, and we convicted her. But most people don't think the auditor's office of having prosecutors and law enforcement folks. But our job is to watch over taxpayer dollars. So if somebody out there is lying, cheating, and stealing with taxpayer dollars, call us, 1-866-FRAUD-OH, or go to our website, ohioauditor.gov. Click on it. You can report suspected waste, fraud, and abuse.
When you say forensic auditing, what is forensic?
Great question. Essentially, most auditing goes in and does a sample. If there are 10,000 transactions, we'll pick a sample of those transactions and look to see if they follow the right control procedures. Okay, did the receipts match the expenditure? Was the expenditure linked to a proper public purpose? They do a bunch of testing, but they don't look at all 10,000 transactions. Forensic auditors go in and do look at all the transactions in a certain area to follow a financial crimes area. They follow the money to figure out what happened and where the money went. You've heard the statement, follow the money. There are follow the money people. They're really good. They cross-match. In this case, they pulled the bank account statements. They pulled since it involved fake vehicle sales, they pulled the vehicle sales records. They went to the customers who purportedly bought the vehicles and said, were these a gift from you to the pack? And they did all of that forensic accounting work to match up the financial transactions and tell the story about what really happened. For example, when we did the Metropolitan Housing Director in Athens, who stole over $2.5 million, we just found another $500,000 in other transactions that weren't part of the conviction. But when we sent our forensic auditors in to buttress the rest of it, they found additional transactions that were suspect. And when we pulled the records, we were able to dig in and get more.
These are people that are skilled at identifying fraudulent, fake receipts, these types of things.
They're every scammer's worst nightmare, because when they pull on a thread, they don't quit until the whole sweater's unrolled.
And when you agree that the auditor's office, the state of Ohio, and the Ohio Revised Code is dead serious about prosecuting this kind of crime?
Look, when we were dealing with the unemployment fraud and overpayments during the pandemic, our friends in the federal government, the U.S. attorney's offices, were telling the federal side of this, don't bring us cases under $2 million. I told them, bring me cases over $2. and we will prosecute them in the state level. The fact of the matter is, if somebody's lying, stealing, and cheating, no dollar is too little. And so we go 100% of those. And frankly, the Ohio Revised Code makes those very serious offenses very fast.
Those are felonies, most of them,
in
right?
almost
People
all
spend
cases.
time in prison.
Well, yes. And sometimes they spend time, this Metropolitan Transit Director is looking at upwards of 21 years potentially in prison for about $30,000 in crime. And so that's the kind of thing. And like everything, most of the time it's the cover up that adds additional penalties. Had she just, directed money illegally, we have a law in Ohio, thank you legislature, that says you can't spend government tax dollars asking taxpayers for more of their government tax dollars. In this budget, the legislature just expanded that to charter municipalities. Thank you for doing that. That is absolutely the right answer. Well, if you violate that law, the penalties are bad, but they're not into the world bad. But if you cover up violating that law, now they become elevated felonies. And it's the cover up in most of these cases that causes the real heartburn.
And I'm sure one of the more complex types of cases would be inappropriate spending or fraud when it comes to non-governmental organizations that maybe take public money.
Well, you're thinking about things like the Columbus Zoo. Yes, it's a big deal. And look, I think one of the things that the legislature needs to start getting a handle on is this concept where government are sending tax dollars to 501c3 nonprofits. Some of them are very legitimate, like we give money to the food banks and they're trying to feed the hungry. But part of it is also, and has been used in other places, as a political scheme where I hire my former political rivals so they don't run against me, who started at C4, that, it's the Sisters of Good Government.
It's the Doge
charity
on the local level, right?
It's exactly. And what we saw from Doge was a great example of what was happening at the federal government. When Stacey Abrams gets billions of dollars to provide appliances to poor people, but they spent, a very small chunk of that for appliances and a big chunk of the billions of dollars she got on political activities or hiring political operatives, you really wonder what the real purpose is. Our cities and counties are a bigger issue than the state government here in this area. But, we have an instance not long ago where the state legislature, as part of the issue, sent money to a 501c3 for the purported purpose of promoting water quality. And ultimately, they went out to promote things that was their own political agenda. And that's the kind of question that we really need to have greater oversight on these 501c3s that are getting government money.
And as a final thought, as a former president of the Ohio Senate, and you served plenty of terms in the General Assembly, what is your message about having a balanced budget for a reason? It seems like the state does a pretty good job of tracking general revenue, of having a balanced budget, and also even getting down to a single tax bracket. It seems like trying to reduce the burden on taxpayers, but also be accountable. What would your message be?
Look, I'll start out by just giving the legislature really good kudos on this last budget. You guys were wrestling with some very difficult concepts. And the Senate, the House worked great with me. And from the auditor's perspective, when you fund my budget requests, we go great. We can continue to do good government. We can continue to do performance audits. We had a great working relationship in the work the House did, and the Senate added to it and made it stronger. It's very important that states keep balanced budgets, because states are, one, we're the laboratories of democracy. But your ability to only spend what you take in without carrying huge reserves is a huge advantage for state government. And for that reason, the states operate more efficiently, because you don't just blow money. You don't give money to Stacey Abrams for her $1 billion program because you don't have it. You're not going to fund K-12, or you're not going to fund higher ed, or you're not going to fund something else. The big challenge that comes from a budgeting is trying to weigh multiple competing forces. And the legislature has done a good job doing that. Historically, there are winners, there are losers, but in the end, when you can take us to, I think it's the second lowest flat tax in the country, and continue to try and make Ohio government more efficient, that's a good thing. And one of the things that's constantly been done with regard to budgeting in Ohio is you continue to ask ways to make government work better, faster, cheaper. And when I was Senate president many years ago, we started the beginning of what became DOGE for Ohio, and that's the State Auditor's Office Performance Audit Unit. Since then, the legislature has been great in supporting what now is generating $25 in savings for every dollar in expenditure. Our performance audit division is the DOGE for Ohio.
Efficiency has to be part of the results for state government.
There is no external profit motive in state government. So there's nothing that promotes state government to get more efficient other than state government itself. And in that regard, the creation of the Performance Audit Division is a tool in state government to say, look, we're going to demand that you operate as efficiently as possible. We're going to have you continue to do best practice review to look for better, faster, cheaper. And the State Auditor's Office is all too happy to help. The legislature has been good with helping us receive funds that give us a mission to do that. In this budget, there are 3 or 4 major projects that were added, I think most of them in the Senate, to ask us to do extra performance audit work. One is on the largest area of state spending on Medicaid. The legislature appropriated us direct resources to go in and do a Medicaid performance audit. And it is a big deal to look at efficiency in a program that spends billions, frankly, tens of billions of dollars in Ohio every biennium.
And that's about making sure that the program is run as efficiently as possible so those benefits are there for the people that need them the most.
Well, look, with limited resources, and states, unlike the federal government, can't print money. So you have limited resources. If you spend an extra $1 billion on Medicaid that you don't need to, it's $1 billion either that has to be taken out of the wallets of Bob and Betty Buckeye, or it's $1 billion that you can't spend on K-12 education, higher education, property tax relief, all of these other things that Ohioans demand and want. And ultimately, if you can cut that $1 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse, you know what? That's real money for real Ohioans.
State Auditor Keith Faber, insightful perspective. Thanks for your time. Happy to see you as always.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming to Salina.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.